Tonight, let us wander back to a land where the mountains touch the skies and the seas carry whispers of empires. Italy, a peninsula stretching into the heart of the Mediterranean, has been home to fishermen and poets, merchants and warriors, emperors and saints. Its soil carries layers of time, where olive trees grow above the ruins of forgotten temples, and bells toll above the cobblestones once marched upon by legions. The story of the Italians is not simply one of conquest or collapse. It is a long unfolding of many identities: Etruscans and Romans, Lombards and Venetians, Florentines and Sicilians. It is a tapestry where every thread is dyed with ambition, artistry, and survival. As the sun set on the Roman Empire, Italy became a land of fragments. Yet each fragment shone with its own brilliance. Venice rose from the waters with ships that ruled the Adriatic. Florence painted dreams upon canvas and carved eternity into marble. Genoa, Pisa, Milan, each city carried its own rhythm, and together they formed a mosaic of genius and rivalry. Tonight, we will drift through their centuries. We will sail across their seas, walk beneath their arches, and listen to the voices of philosophers and merchants. We will follow their rise, their struggles, and their falls, each moment teaching us not just of the past, but of the timeless nature of human ambition. So, close your eyes and let the story of the Italians carry you gently into the night. When the Western Roman Empire finally crumbled in 476 CE, the Italian peninsula found itself in a silence it had not known for centuries. For generations, Rome had been the heartbeat of the world, its legions marching outward, its emperors ruling with authority, its roads connecting provinces across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Yet now, the marble forums stood abandoned. The aqueducts fell into disrepair, and the Colosseum, once roaring with the cries of gladiators, echoed only with the wind. Italy became a land of fragments. The Goths marched in from the north, carving out their short-lived kingdoms, while the Byzantines clung desperately to the coasts, trying to preserve an echo of imperial grandeur. The Lombards followed soon after, settling in the fertile valleys of the north, while in the south, small duchies fought for survival against the tides of invaders. Each fragment carried a memory of Rome, yet each was already shaping a new identity. Despite the chaos, life did not vanish. Farmers still tilled the volcanic soil of Campania, producing wheat and grapes that nourished villages. Fishermen still cast their nets in the Tyrrhenian Sea, their boats bobbing under the same stars that had guided Roman sailors. Monks withdrew into quiet monasteries, preserving the knowledge of the ancients. In candlelit scriptoria, they copied texts of Virgil and Aristotle, saving sparks of wisdom from being extinguished by the darkness. Italy was not yet a nation. It was a patchwork of duchies, bishoprics, and city-states, each wary of the other, each dreaming of power. Yet from this fragmentation, something remarkable began to grow. Unlike the vast, centralized empires of the past, Italy became a land where local pride flourished. Cities turned inward, building their own walls, cultivating their own saints and nurturing their own traditions. This fierce independence would one day give birth to extraordinary creativity, but for now, it was survival. The roads of the empire were no longer filled with marching legions, but with wandering pilgrims, drawn to the tomb of St. Peter in Rome or the shrine of St. Benedict at Monte Cassino. They brought life back into the old roots. Merchants followed them, carrying spices from the east, wool from the north, and glass from the lagoon city of Venice, which was just beginning to rise from the swamps. Slowly, Italy was weaving itself into a new rhythm, guided not by emperors, but by bishops, abbots, and local lords. In the north, the Lombards created their duchies, blending with Roman traditions and giving Italy new laws, new customs, and even new names. In the south, the shadow of Byzantium lingered. As Greek-speaking administrators tried to hold Sicily and Calabria, the peninsula was no longer the heart of one empire, but the crossroads of many worlds. Here, East met West, Latin met Greek, and the seeds of medieval Italy were quietly taking root. What had been lost in unity was regained in diversity. From the ruins of empire, Italy was becoming a land of cities, each carrying its own destiny. The dream of Rome still lived in memory, but the Italians were already becoming something else: resilient, divided, yet endlessly inventive. From the silence of the northern lagoons, a city began to emerge. At first, it was nothing more than a scattering of huts on wooden stilts, a refuge for fishermen and exiles fleeing the chaos of the mainland. Yet, by the 9th century, Venice had become something entirely new, a city born not of land, but of water, surrounded by marshes and tidal currents, protected by the sea. Venice was nearly unassailable. It was poor in farmland, yet rich in something far more valuable: its position at the heart of the Mediterranean's trade routes. Venice was unlike the crumbling duchies and kingdoms of the mainland. It had no need for sprawling castles or fertile valleys. Its wealth came from the oars of its rowers and the sails of its ships. From the shallow lagoons, Venetian galleys spread outward, first trading salt and fish with nearby towns, then venturing deeper into the Adriatic. Slowly, the city turned its gaze eastward toward Constantinople, the markets of Egypt, and the treasures of the Levant. By the time other Italian cities were still struggling for survival, Venice had already mastered the sea. Its merchants grew wealthy from silk and spices, ivory and gems, brought across the Mediterranean. In return, they carried timber, iron, and glass, the handiwork of skilled Italian craftsmen. Venetian glassmakers became renowned across Europe, their furnaces blazing with colors no other land could replicate. But Venice's true genius was not just in trade, it was in independence. While emperors and kings demanded tribute from the mainland, Venice was governed by its own citizens, led by the elected Doge. In a world where most power came from birthright, Venice created a system where wealth and skill determined influence. Its government, carved into the Great Council and Senate, became a model of resilience. The city was alive with contrasts. Narrow alleys echoed with the laughter of gondoliers, while the great Piazza San Marco glittered with mosaics that shimmered like sunlight on water. Bells rang from the campanile as ships returned with exotic goods, their sails heavy with stories of faraway lands. The Venetians saw themselves not merely as Italians, but as citizens of the world, a people who lived between East and West, taking from both and belonging fully to neither. This maritime spirit spread beyond Venice. Genoa, another seafaring city, rose to challenge Venetian power, sending its own fleets across the Mediterranean. Rivalry between the two became legendary, their galleys clashing in naval battles that decided the fate of empires. Pisa, too, with its proud towers and merchant families, carved a space in the sea. Together, these maritime republics transformed Italy into a hub of global commerce. Italy, once broken into fragments after Rome's collapse, was finding a new kind of unity, not through emperors or legions, but through trade. The sea became its empire, and its ships were the new legions. Through this, Italians began to rediscover their power, not by conquering land, but by commanding waters. The rise of Venice was not only about wealth, it was about imagination, for, in its shimmering canals, Italians learned that a city could build an empire not with swords, but with sails. As Venice built her empire upon the waters, another city was preparing to build an empire of the mind. In the valley of the Arno River, surrounded by the rolling hills of Tuscany, Florence emerged not as a maritime republic, but as a republic of merchants, bankers, and dreamers. By the 14th century, Florence had grown wealthy through the wool trade and international banking. Its coins, the golden florin, were recognized across Europe, carrying the city's influence far beyond its walls. Yet Florence's true wealth was not measured in gold, but in ideas. Life in Florence pulsed with energy. Narrow streets were filled with artisans shaping leather, weaving silk, or hammering bronze into delicate designs. The clang of hammers from the workshops echoed against the stone walls of churches rising higher each year. And, above all, there was a restless spirit, an unshakable belief that human creativity could transform the world. Unlike the fractured kingdoms of Northern Europe, Florence was small and self-contained, yet fiercely proud. Each citizen carried a sense that their city was destined for greatness. At the heart of this transformation stood families like the Medici, whose fortune from banking became the lifeblood of artists, sculptors, and scholars. They did not merely collect wealth, they spent it to create beauty. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as the Magnificent, gathered poets and painters around his table, encouraging them to imagine boldly. In Florence, art was no longer just for the glory of God, it became a celebration of human potential. The city's skyline told the story. Rising above the rooftops was Brunelleschi's dome, a miracle of engineering that seemed to defy gravity. No one had built such a structure since the days of Rome, and yet Florence dared to dream it into existence. Inside its chapels, frescoes blossomed with color, capturing not only saints and angels, but also the dignity of ordinary men and women. In workshops along the Arno, young apprentices learned the craft of drawing and perspective, guided by masters who believed that the human eye could be trained to see the world anew Names that echo through history: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti. Sandro Botticelli once walked those cobbled streets, carrying sketchbooks and chisels, restless with visions of beauty. To them, Florence was more than a city, it was a stage for creation, a workshop of genius. Their works did not merely adorn walls or decorate altars, they reshaped how humanity saw itself. The Renaissance was not only about rediscovering ancient texts, it was about believing that mankind could reach the heights once reserved for gods. Philosophers gathered in Florence to discuss Plato and Aristotle, blending classical wisdom with Christian faith. Humanism, the philosophy that placed man at the center of inquiry, was born here. It was a quiet revolution. Instead of looking only toward heaven, Florentines began to look at the human face, the human body, and the human spirit. In their eyes, the divine could be found not only in the church, but in the artistry of man himself. Yet Florence was not without shadows. Rival families plotted against one another. The Medici faced conspiracies, and the city sometimes trembled on the edge of civil war. Still, even in times of crisis, the passion for creation did not fade. When Savonarola, the fiery preacher, called for the burning of vanities, urging Florentines to destroy their paintings and books, the city bent for a moment, but never broke. Beauty was too deeply woven into its soul. By the 15th century, Florence had become the beating heart of the Renaissance. From its workshops, ideas spread outward, carried by merchants and scholars to Rome, Milan, and beyond the Alps. Europe would never be the same. The Italians, once divided into fragments, I had given the world a gift more enduring than empire, the belief that through art, reason, and imagination, humanity could rise again. In Florence, history shifted quietly, not with armies or battles, but with paintbrushes and chisels, and as the lamps burned late in the studios of young artists, the world itself was being reborn. As Florence bloomed with art and philosophy, Italy itself became a patchwork of rival powers. Unlike France or England, where kings forged unity through strong monarchies, the Italian peninsula remained a mosaic of city-states. Each glittered like a jewel, but together they formed a crown without a single head. Venice, Genoa, Florence, Milan, and the Papal States each claimed authority, yet none could dominate all. This rivalry was both Italy's weakness and its greatest source of vitality. The Italians called it campanilismo, the love of one's own bell tower. To a Florentine, loyalty was owed first to Florence, not to Italy as a nation. A Venetian cared only for the Republic of St. Mark. A Milanese swore allegiance to the Visconti or Sforza family who ruled his city. This fierce local pride created constant tension, but it also fueled competition. Each city sought to outshine the others in wealth, in armies, and above all, in splendor. Venice, mistress of the seas, grew powerful on maritime trade, her fleets protecting convoys that reached from Alexandria to London. Genoa, her rival, contested every harbor and every sea lane. Their galleys clashed in battles that shook the Mediterranean. none more decisive than the War of Chioggia in the late 14th century, when Venice finally broke Genoa's naval dominance. Yet even in victory, Venice looked warily at her rivals, knowing the balance of power was delicate. On the mainland, Florence and Milan became locked in their own struggle. Florence, governed as a republic of merchants, represented a new vision of civic freedom. Milan, under the Visconti and later the Sforza, was a duchy of military might. The plains of Lombardy became a chessboard where alliances shifted constantly. Florence turned to Venice or the papacy for support. Milan sought allies in France or the Holy Roman Empire. The rivalry was not only military, it was cultural. Each city commissioned works of art, not only for devotion, but as symbols of prestige. Cathedrals, palaces, and frescoes were built as much to proclaim power as to honor God. Amid this rivalry, Rome too struggled to assert itself. The Pope was both a spiritual leader and a temporal prince, ruling the Papal States from the Lateran and later the Vatican. Pilgrims came to Rome in endless numbers, but the city often lay weakened by corruption, neglect, or foreign influence. Yet the papacy remained a force that no Italian city could ignore. When alliances shifted, the Pope's blessing or his wrath could change the course of war. These rivalries created both peril and possibility. Italy became a theater where ideas spread quickly, carried by merchants and scholars who moved between courts. A poet in Florence might find patrons in Milan. An architect in Venice might be summoned to Rome. The competition pushed cities to excel, each trying to surpass the others in art, architecture, and learning. Rivalry became a strange kind of cooperation, united not by political bonds, but by the shared pursuit of greatness. Yet beneath the brilliance lay fragility. Constant wars drained treasuries and devastated countrysides. Mercenary armies, led by condottieri, switched sides when the money ran out, leaving cities vulnerable. Ordinary peasants bore the weight of taxes, while nobles feasted in marble halls. Italy shone like a lantern, but its flame flickered in the winds of division. Still, in these centuries of rivalry, the Italians created a civilization unmatched in diversity. Venice looked outward, building a maritime empire. Florence looked inward, nurturing art and thought. Milan stood as a fortress of arms. Rome carried the mantle of faith. Together, they formed a symphony, sometimes harmonious, often discordant, but always rich. Italy was not yet a nation, but it had already become the stage upon which Europe's cultural future was rehearsed. And though the rivalries would one day invite foreign invaders, for now they fueled a golden age, an age where competition gave birth to brilliance. For centuries after the fall of the Western Empire, Rome lived as a shadow of its former glory. Its forums lay in ruin, its aqueducts broken, its marble stolen for new buildings. Pilgrims still came to pray at the tombs of saints. But the eternal city was no longer the master of the world. Yet by the 15th and 16th centuries, Rome stirred again, awakened not by emperors but by popes who dreamed of restoring the city's greatness. The papacy, long torn by corruption and exile, had returned from Avignon determined to make Rome once more the center of Christendom. Popes such as Nicholas V, Julius II, and Leo X poured wealth into rebuilding the city. Where weeds once grew, new basilicas rose. The Vatican became a palace of power, its halls echoing with the footsteps of cardinals and envoys. Rome was reborn not as the seat of a worldly empire, but as the throne of a spiritual one. At the heart of this rebirth stood St. Peter's Basilica. Nicholas V began the project, but it was Julius II who gave it grandeur. He envisioned a church that would rival the temples of the ancients, a dome that would rise higher than any built since antiquity. Architects like Bramante and later Michelangelo labored to turn vision into stone, their designs combining faith with majesty. To walk beneath that vast dome was to feel both the humility of man and the glory of God. But Rome's rebirth was not only in architecture, it was in art. Julius II summoned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, high on scaffolding. The artist labored for years, his brush transforming plaster into a vision of creation and judgment. Adam reaching out to God, prophets foretelling, angels swirling in divine motion. This was not merely decoration, it was a window into eternity. Raphael, too, filled papal chambers with frescoes of philosophers and saints, blending classical wisdom with Christian truth. Rome became once again the world's capital of beauty. The papacy's power was more than artistic, it was political. Too, popes raised armies, forged alliances, and waged wars to defend their territories. Julius II, the warrior pope, donned armor and led troops into battle, determined to preserve Rome's independence amid the rivalries of France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. The Papal States became not just a land of prayer, but a battleground where faith and politics entwined. Yet, Rome's grandeur carried shadows. The wealth that built basilicas and frescoes often came from heavy taxes and the sale of indulgences, sparking resentment across Europe. While pilgrims gazed in awe at the majesty of St. Peter's, reformers in the north began to question the very foundations of the church. Martin Luther's protest in 1517 would ignite a reformation that shook all of Christendom, and much of it was born in reaction to the splendor of Renaissance Rome. Still, in those luminous years, the Eternal City reclaimed her place as the heart of the world. Travelers from across Europe came to marvel at her treasures. Scholars filled libraries with rediscovered manuscripts. Artists and architects carried Rome's influence back to their homelands, spreading the Renaissance beyond Italy. Rome had fallen once, but now she stood reborn, her domes and frescoes proclaiming not just survival, but renewal. For the Italians, Rome was more than a city. It was memory, faith, and ambition entwined. In its rebirth, the people of Italy saw themselves reflected a nation not yet united, but bound by the shared inheritance of beauty and belief. The Eternal City had taught them that from ruin could come resurrection, and from division could rise greatness. The brilliance of Renaissance Italy shone like a jewel, but jewels often attract greedy eyes. By the end of the 15th century, Italy's wealth, art, and independence had drawn the attention of powerful monarchies beyond the Alps. France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire all stronger, larger, and more unified, looked southward and saw not one Italy, but a mosaic of divided states, ripe for conquest. The spark came in 1494, when Charles VIII of France marched his army across the Alps. He brought with him something Italy had never seen before: modern cannon, capable of blasting through medieval walls in hours rather than weeks. The city-states, unprepared for such firepower, fell quickly. Florence trembled, Naples surrendered, and Rome itself quaked at the sound of French drums. It was the beginning of the Italian Wars, a conflict that would rage for over half a century, pulling foreign powers into the heart of the peninsula. Italy became a battlefield where others played their great game. France sought to claim Naples and Milan. Spain defended its influence in Sicily and the south. The Holy Roman Emperor pressed his rights in Lombardy. Each Italian city-state, desperate to survive, turned to one foreign ally or another, but alliances shifted as quickly as the seasons, and too often the Italians found themselves pawns in struggles they could not control. The wars brought devastation. Villages burned, crops were trampled, and mercenary soldiers, condottieri who once fought for Italian lords, now served foreign kings. The masterpieces of Florence and Rome stood vulnerable to plunder. Even Venice, mistress of the seas, watched with unease as rival powers carved up the mainland. The splendor of Italy, so carefully built in centuries of rivalry and creativity, suddenly seemed fragile under the weight of foreign steel. One moment stands out above all: the sack of Rome in 1527. Troops of the Holy Roman Emperor, half-starved and mutinous, stormed the Eternal City. Churches were looted, palaces set aflame, and the streets ran with fear. Even cardinals fled for their lives as the very seat of Christendom was humbled. To many, it seemed as though the Renaissance had reached its tragic end. Rome, which had risen in glory under the popes, now lay broken once more. And yet, the story was not only one of loss. Even amid destruction, the Italians endured. Florence, though battered by French and imperial armies, continued to nurture art and thought. Venice skillfully balanced diplomacy, preserving her independence by playing France and Spain against one another. Milan, though occupied, adapted to new rulers and remained a center of commerce. Italy's genius lay not only in creation, but in survival. Still, the wars revealed a painful truth: division had left the Italians vulnerable. While larger nations built strong monarchies and centralized armies, Italy remained a quilt of rival republics and duchies, each jealous of the other. Their brilliance dazzled the world, but their disunity opened the gates to conquest. The Renaissance, born of competition, had also sown the seeds of fragility. By the mid-16th century, Spain emerged as the dominant power. From Naples to Milan, Spanish governors ruled much of the peninsula, while the papacy balanced its independence with careful diplomacy. Italy remained rich in art and commerce, but its destiny was no longer in its own hands. Foreign banners flew above Italian castles, and foreign soldiers patrolled Italian streets. Yet even as foreign powers fought over her soil, Italy gave the world treasures that would never fade. The wars could burn fields and topple walls, but they could not erase the frescoes of Raphael or the poetry of Petrarch, the domes of Florence or the canals of Venice. The Italians had been conquered politically, but culturally they had conquered their conquerors. French kings decorated their palaces with Italian artists. Spanish nobles sought the elegance of Italian tutors. Even in defeat, Italy's splendor endured. The Italian wars marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. They revealed the fragility of glory, but they also proved that beauty could outlast the clash of arms. For in Italy, even ruin became part of the story, woven into the long tapestry of survival. After the storms of war and conquest, Italy entered a new chapter. The 17th century was an age of shadows and light, where decline in politics was balanced by a new flowering of faith and beauty. Foreign rulers now controlled much of the peninsula, Spain in Naples and Milan, Austria in Lombardy, the papacy in central Italy, but the Italians, though no longer masters of their destiny, remained masters of imagination. Out of struggle came the Baroque, a style that would dazzle the world. Baroque was not gentle like the Renaissance. It was bold, theatrical, and full of movement. Where Renaissance art had sought balance and harmony, Baroque reached for drama and awe. Churches rose with twisting columns, gilded altars, and ceilings that seemed to open into heaven itself. Painters filled canvases with scenes of swirling clouds, divine light, and human passion. Sculptors carved marble into forms that seemed to breathe and tremble. Rome again became the stage. Determined to assert spiritual power during the Counter-Reformation, the popes turned to art as a weapon of faith. St. Peter's Basilica was crowned with its mighty dome. Completed by Michelangelo, but given new life with Bernini's sweeping colonnades, to step into the piazza was to feel embraced by the church itself. Arms of stone welcoming the faithful from every land. Inside, Bernini's bronze canopy rose above the high altar, twisting like fire toward the heavens. Caravaggio, the restless painter, gave Baroque its soul. His canvases shocked with realism, saints with dirty feet, apostles with lined faces, Christ appearing not as an icon but as a man of flesh and blood. Light and shadow clashed violently on his canvases, as though heaven itself had broken into the taverns and alleys of Rome. To look upon his works was to feel faith not as distant majesty, but as raw human encounter in Naples under Spanish rule. Music found new heights. Opera, born in Florence, matured here into a popular art form. Theatres filled with voices that soared above the hardships of daily life. In Sicily, Spanish Baroque transformed towns with facades carved in exuberant detail, balconies curling like waves, angels and cherubs spilling across stone. Even under foreign governors, Italian cities refused silence. They spoke through architecture, painting, and song. Yet life in Baroque Italy was not all splendor. Poverty lingered in the countryside, where peasants labored for distant rulers. Wars between Spain and France sometimes spilled across the peninsula, and the plague returned with deadly force, striking Milan and Naples. Still, Italians found resilience. In markets, bakers sold bread baked with centuries of tradition. in workshops, violin makers in Cremona crafted instruments whose voices still enchant the world. Even in hardship, the culture of Italy breathed life. The Baroque age was a paradox. Politically, Italy was divided and subdued, but artistically, it conquered Europe. Kings and princes sought Italian architects to build their palaces, Italian painters to decorate their chapels, Italian musicians to compose for their courts. The very nations that ruled Italy imported her genius, spreading Baroque style from Madrid to Vienna, from Paris to Prague. For Italians, the Baroque was more than art. It was survival. In a time when power lay elsewhere, they turned to creativity as their inheritance. Each church, each opera, each canvas was a statement Italy might be ruled, but she would never be silenced. Thus, the 17th century became not an ending, but a transformation. The Renaissance had celebrated man's harmony with reason. The Baroque celebrated man's struggle with passion, out of division and decline. Italians created beauty that still dazzles centuries later. And in the candlelit glow of Baroque Rome, the spirit of Italy burned brightly, reminding the world that even in shadows, there can be splendor. As the Baroque age gave way to the 18th century, the Italians once again stood at a crossroads. Politically, the peninsula remained fragmented. Spain still held Naples and Sicily. Austria ruled Lombardy. The Papal States maintained their authority in central Italy, and smaller duchies clung to survival. Yet even in division, new winds began to blow across Europe. They carried the spirit of the Enlightenment reason, science, and reform. And Italy, long celebrated for beauty, became a place where ideas also began to challenge tradition. In Milan, intellectual circles gathered in salons and coffee houses, debating questions of liberty and progress. Writers like Pietro Verri and Cesare Beccaria sought to bring rational order to society. Beccaria's book, On Crimes and Punishments, 1764, argued against torture and the death penalty, demanding justice not built on fear, but on fairness. His words echoed across Europe, influencing reformers from Paris to St. Petersburg. Italy, once the land of emperors and artists, was now giving voice to a new conscience of law and humanity. Florence, though no longer the heart of empire or Renaissance, also embraced change. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany, under enlightened rulers like Leopold II, became a laboratory for reform. Serfdom was abolished, trade restrictions were loosened, and in 1786, Tuscany became the first state in the world to outlaw the death penalty. In the very soil where the Renaissance had celebrated the dignity of man, the Enlightenment now sought to protect his rights. Science, too, found a home in Italy. In Bologna, Laura Bassi, one of the first women to earn a university chair in physics, lectured on Newtonian principles. In Padua, Galileo's legacy lived on, as astronomers and anatomists challenged old assumptions. Italy's universities, some of the oldest in Europe, became stages where tradition and discovery wrestled for dominance. But Italy's Enlightenment was not only about philosophy and science, it was also about music. The 18th century saw the rise of opera as Europe's most beloved art form. Composers like Alessandro Scarlatti and later Gioacchino Rossini gave the world melodies that carried both grandeur and intimacy. In theatres from Naples to Venice, audiences wept and cheered as stories of love, betrayal, and triumph unfolded on stage. The music of Italy transcended borders, weaving its way into the hearts of kings and commoners alike. Yet, the Enlightenment also revealed Italy's limits. Political power still lay largely in foreign hands, and many reforms remained fragile. The Papal States resisted change, clinging to old authority, and peasants in the countryside often saw little improvement in their daily lives. The brilliance of Italian thought and music could not yet overcome the reality of division. As the century drew to a close, greater storms approached. Across the Alps, revolution erupted in France, toppling monarchies and proclaiming liberty, equality, fraternity. The shockwaves reached Italy quickly. Revolutionary armies marched into the peninsula, spreading both fear and hope. For some Italians, the French Revolution was a promise of freedom from old rulers. For others, it was a threat to faith and order. The Enlightenment, once confined to books and salons, was now being tested on the battlefield. Still, the 18th century left its mark on Italy. It taught that beauty alone was not enough that reason. Justice and reform were also part of human greatness. It reminded Italians that their legacy was not only in the stones of cathedrals or the notes of operas, but in the courage to question and to change. The Baroque had dazzled with splendor, but the Enlightenment asked deeper questions. Could a divided land find unity in reason? Could justice replace cruelty? Could knowledge set mankind free? These questions, born in Italy's coffee houses and courts, would echo into the next century, when the struggle for true nationhood began. For centuries, Italy had been a land of fragments, each city proud, each region bound to foreign crowns. But in the 19th century, a new dream began to stir, the dream of Italia as a single nation. Italians called it the Risorgimento, the resurgence, the awakening of a people long divided, longing to be one. The seeds of this awakening were planted in the Enlightenment, when writers spoke of liberty and reform. They grew stronger during the French Revolution, when Napoleon's armies swept across the peninsula. For a brief moment, Italy tasted unity under Napoleonic rule. Its laws codified, its provinces reorganized. When Napoleon fell, the Congress of Vienna, 1815, restored the old order, handing Lombardy and Venetia to Austria, returning the Bourbons to Naples, and reaffirming papal rule in Rome. Yet the idea of unity could not be erased. It lived quietly in hearts, waiting for its hour. Secret societies carried the flame. The Carbonari, sworn brothers of liberty, whispered in taverns and forests, plotting insurrections against foreign rulers. Their revolts often failed, but they inspired new generations. Giuseppe Mazzini, poet and visionary, gave the dream a voice. Through his movement, Young Italy, he declared that the peninsula's destiny was not to remain divided, but to rise as one free republic. His words spread like fire among students, exiles, and soldiers who longed for a homeland greater than their city walls. The path to unity, however, was not simple. Italy was caught between ideals and pragmatism. Mazzini dreamed of a republic, but others believed monarchy could better achieve unification. Here entered Count Camillo di Cavour, Prime Minister of Piedmont, Sardinia. Shrewd and patient, he used diplomacy and strategy to weave alliances. He sought not revolution, but gradual unification under the House of Savoy. For Cavour, politics was the art of possible, an art Italians had practiced for centuries. Then came Giuseppe Garibaldi, soldier of fortune, hero of the people. With his red-shirted volunteers, he became the sword of Italian unity. In 1860, Garibaldi led his famous Expedition of the Thousand, landing in Sicily with a small band of fighters. Against all odds, his courage inspired thousands, and soon he swept northward, conquering the kingdom of the two Sicilies. Peasants cheered, towns opened their gates, and Garibaldi's march became a legend. When Garibaldi met King Victor Emmanuel II in Naples, the dream began to take form. North and South, Republicans and monarchists, visionaries and pragmatists all now converged toward unity. In 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed. The peninsula, long divided by dukes and foreign crowns, now had a king who ruled in the name of a united people. Yet the Risorgimento was not complete. Venetia remained under Austrian control until 1866, when war finally brought it into the fold. Rome, guarded by French troops, remained under papal rule until 1870, when Italy seized its eternal city and declared it the capital. At last, the dream of generations had come true. Italy was whole, but unity did not erase struggle. The new nation faced poverty in the south, unrest in the countryside, and tensions between church and state. Still, for the first time in centuries, Italians could call themselves one people. The bell towers of Florence, the domes of Venice, the palaces of Milan, and the vineyards of Naples now belonged to a single flag. The Risorgimento was more than a political event. It was a spiritual rebirth. It gave Italians a common story, a sense that their history, Rome, the Renaissance, the struggles of city-states was not a series of fragments, but chapters of a single book, a book that now had a future, written in the hope of unity. From the whispers of secret societies to the thunder of Garibaldi's marches, the Risorgimento proved that even after centuries of division, a people could rise again. Italy had awakened. The dream of unity had been achieved, but the reality of modern Italy proved far more difficult than the dream itself. The new kingdom, born in 1861, inherited divisions that centuries of foreign rule and rivalry had carved deep into the land. The industrial north bustled with factories, banks, and railroads, while the south remained poor, agricultural, and often resentful. The church and the state clashed over Rome, leaving many devout Catholics suspicious of the new government. Unity had given Italy a flag, but not yet harmony. As the 19th century turned to the 20th, Italy sought its place among the great powers of Europe. Ambitions grew, and so too did restlessness. Some dreamed of reviving the glory of Rome, of building colonies in Africa, of standing equal to Britain, France, and Germany. Others sought reform at home, hoping to ease poverty and grant greater rights to workers and peasants. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Italy hesitated, bound by alliances but pulled by opportunity. It entered the conflict in 1915 on the side of the Allies, hoping to gain territory from Austria-Hungary. The war was brutal. Along the Isonzo River, Italian soldiers fought and died in mountain trenches, enduring snow, hunger, and relentless shell fire. Victory came in 1918, but it was hollow. Promised lands were only partially delivered, and Italy felt betrayed, a mutilated victory. Many called it. The disillusionment ran deep. Out of that bitterness rose new voices, loud and dangerous. Benito Mussolini, once a socialist journalist, now preached the creed of fascism, discipline, nationalism, and absolute power. In 1922, his black shirts marched on Rome, and the king, seeking to avoid civil war, invited Mussolini to form a government. Thus began 2 decades of dictatorship. Mussolini promised to make Italy strong, to restore the grandeur of empire. He drained marshes, built roads, and staged parades that filled the streets with banners and drums. Yet beneath the spectacle lay repression. Dissent was silenced. Opponents jailed or exiled. Freedoms stripped away. Italy allied itself with Nazi Germany, and soon the nation was drawn into the fire of the Second World War. The war brought devastation. Italian soldiers fought in deserts and mountains, often ill-equipped, while at home, cities suffered bombing raids and hunger. In 1943, Mussolini fell, but the peninsula became a battlefield between German occupiers and Allied forces. Villages burned, partisans fought in the hills, and ordinary Italians endured suffering that tested the nation's soul. When the war ended in 1945, Mussolini was gone, and Italy faced the ashes of defeat. Yet from those ashes, renewal began. In 1946, Italians voted to abolish the monarchy and declare a republic. The wounds of dictatorship and war ran deep, but democracy slowly took root. With aid from abroad and the determination of its people, Italy rebuilt. Factories hummed, highways stretched across the peninsula, and in the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, an economic miracle transformed the nation. Vespa scooters zipped through streets. Films from Cinecittà enchanted the world, and Italian fashion began to define elegance. Modern Italy carried contradictions, ancient ruins beside glass towers, timeless traditions beside restless innovation. It was not free of challenges: political instability, corruption, and social divides continued to shape its course. Yet, through it all, Italians preserved their genius for living, celebrating food, family, art, and community with a warmth that no hardship could erase. By the end of the 20th century, Italy stood not as an empire, nor as a battlefield of rivals, but as a republic within a larger Europe, from Rome's ruins to Florence's domes, from Venice's canals to Sicily's shores. The long story of the Italians had carried them through rise and fall, struggle and renewal. Their past was not a straight line, but a mosaic, sometimes fractured, often fragile, but always beautiful. Modern Italy reminds us that nations, like people, are never finished. They are always becoming, always searching for balance between memory and hope. And in that search, the Italians remain what they have always been: dreamers, survivors, and creators of beauty. Italy has always been more than a land. It is a tapestry, woven from threads of glory and loss, faith and reason, ruin and renewal. From the broken columns of Rome to the marble domes of Florence, from Venetian sails on distant seas to Garibaldi's red shirts marching across dusty roads, the Italians have lived many lives, yet carried a single spirit. Theirs is not a simple story of rise and fall. It is a rhythm, like the bells of their churches echoing across valleys. Each age has brought triumphs that dazzled the world, and each has carried shadows of division, invasion, or despair. Yet, through every fall, Italy has found a way to rise again. The Roman Empire may have crumbled, but its memory shaped Europe. The Renaissance may have ended in war, but its art still glows in the world's imagination. The struggles of unity may have left scars, but they also gave a people a nation. Even in the tragedies of modern war, Italy rediscovered its strength, choosing democracy and rebuilding with courage. What endures is not only power or conquest, but beauty. Beauty in a line of poetry, in a brushstroke on a chapel ceiling, in the taste of bread shared at a family table. Beauty in resilience, the ability to endure, to create, to dream even when the world seems broken. That is the gift Italy has given not only to her children, but to all of us. And so tonight, as we leave this journey, let us remember Italy not as a single empire or kingdom, but as a mosaic always changing, never finished, endlessly alive. In her story, we see the truth of history itself, that greatness is not measured only in victories, but in the spirit to rise again. Close your eyes and imagine the soft tolling of a bell across a Tuscan valley, the shimmer of light on Venetian waters, the dome of Rome glowing against the twilight. These are not only memories of the past, they are whispers of eternity. Sleep now, with Italy's story in your heart, and dream of her timeless song